This is a Multistrada DVT that I'm going to do a belt change on. Well, I'm doing valve clearances. I'll pull the belts off and then put new ones on later. The thing you need to remember with the DVT engines is that the mark on this timing shaft here, which has since the start of Pantars been the defining mark for cam timing or belt setup position, is now completely irrelevant. Don't pay any attention to this mark or this shaft in general. On the DVTs, there's a sensor on the crankshaft, which will be on the other side of the engine, and there's sensors on the camshafts. And those sensors on the camshafts are here in the rocker cover. So with the crankshaft and the camshaft being what is important, the timing shaft is no longer relevant. And the second reason for that is that this pulley here and these pulleys on the cams are different sizes. So the relationship between the crankshaft and the timing shaft is no longer 2 to 1. So that the timing shaft doesn't spin at half the engine speed, it spins at 75% engine speed or something, and the rest of the reduction is between these two. So the position of this dot on this shaft varies depending on where it is when you're turning it around, and it lines up once every 50 or 60 or 70 something rotations, I'm not sure which. But the best thing you can do is just completely ignore it. To set one of them up, you put the crank at top dead center horizontal, and it can either be top dead center horizontal firing or top dead center horizontal overlap. That's your only two options. And at any top dead center horizontal firing, if the crank's at TDC, you'll have the marks on the cam pulleys. It's a dot with the yellow around it here, and there's one here. And on the vertical, there's one here, and then there's one hiding down here. Those marks line up with the machine surface on top of the head. So that's the easiest way to know where all the dots line up. To make sure it is actually at top dead center horizontal, I've got the engine locking tool in it. And that's just because I wanted to make sure of where the engine was exactly. But you don't need that locking tool. Just need to make sure it's at top dead center horizontal, this one. The biggest issue you probably have with one of these things is getting these out. I think it's the vacuum sort of they build up between the inside of here on the spark plug, but they can be a nightmare to get out. I get a long zip tie and wrap it up around here, so when I'm pulling, I'm sort of pulling on this section. Don't grab hold of the lead, you just pull the end off it, and then you sort of pull it off and you spray stuff down the side to spray some lubricant to try and get it to release. Eventually it'll just let go, but it takes a while. Don't pull really hard, because when this comes out, you might just rip this end off the lead, or even the other end out of the socket on the coil. I did that once in a 1200 Monster. So try and control yourself. So that's the basic setup of where it is. It's at top dead center, horizontal firing. I can take the belts off now, and when I go to put everything back on, I know where to line the marks up with. And that's all you need to do, is make sure that the marks you have make sense to you when you go to put it back together. And remember, don't pay any attention to this mark here. And now we've done the valve clearances, it's all back together, and putting the belts on. You can see I've got the belts on already. I made a statement earlier about at any top dead centre you can just reassemble it. Well, that might not be exactly the case. I had turned the engine over as part of the valve clearance service. I used the pistons to hold the valves up. And so I don't know where it actually was in terms of whether it was the same top dead centre as it had been when I pulled it apart. So I put the belts on and they were about half a tooth off, I guess. Certainly not where they should have been, given that I had the crank tool locking the crank when I pulled it all apart. And I put a couple of white marks up here on here just to give me a visual, because you can't see the yellow dot over here so easily. And these two white marks were noticeably off, and the dots here were either, you know, half a tooth this way or maybe half a tooth that way. And so after looking at it for a little while, I thought that I'd pull the belts off, rotate the crankshaft one revolution or half a cycle and try there. And I've done that, and it is definitely much closer to where it was. So I'm not sure now if that is actually important, but part of me feels that it is. So if you pull the belts off one of these and you put them back on again later after valve clearance adjustment, after you've rotated the crank around, if everything's half a tooth off, try moving the crank one turn and trying again, because to my eyes it's a lot better now than it was one crank rotation ago. I'm doing the belt tensioning on this now. I've done the horizontal. It's exactly the same as the some of the other engines. Except the tension on these is 90 Hertz, plus or minus 5, the manual says, and for a used belt 80. So I've set this one to 90 Hertz because it's simple and straightforward, and I wasn't going to show that. But the vertical cylinder is not so simple. On these, there's a plastic cover you can see here. Get a little tool out. There's this plastic cover, and it doesn't come out. If you wanted to get it out, you'd need to pull the engine out, and then it would come out. So you have to work around it. There's this hose, which the clamp for which is very hard to get to, so I tend to leave that there. It's not a big deal. But the problem you'll find is that the adjuster is there. So access can be a real issue. So it's just a case of working around it the best you can. This is a tool that I made some time ago, and it tends to work very well on these. And I found that I can actually get it in the top here and get it into a couple of the holes in the adjuster. If I can see what I'm doing, which I can't. I also have a pair of circlip pliers that I cut up for this job. Oh, goodness. Torch. There we go. So that's in. I also have these circlip pliers that I just cut down, cut the little pointy ends off, and they work really well, but probably not in here. So for this one, you'll also see I've drawn a line across here. I've got an engine turning tool on the other side, but it's easier to do it from this side with the back wheel. So that line just lets me know when it's at vertical top dead center firing. You see the dots on the cams, the dot on the inlet cam is there, so you could use that as an idea if you like. Or the horizontal ones, there's one there and one there, but we just need to make sure we're at vertical top dead center firing. I know that because of where I set it up with the engine turning tool, so I can use the back wheel. So you just get in there and do what you need to do. The nut is just there. So you can see just how annoying these are. In terms of tension, it's probably about 85. So let's give it a turn over a couple of times. Going forward. I always turn them over in between adjustments. And that's about 85, whereas first time round it was 95. So if you're getting 85 and 95, it's more like 80. You can get a bit of variation sometimes. So you just choose the best. That's a bit over 90. That's 85 or so. That's 90. I think we'll leave that one there. So there's a little tool in here to hold it. You can't really get a torque wrench onto these that I usually like to do, but I'll just tighten it up. Get myself a longer spanner, if that one fits. It's a case of finding a spanner that gives you what you want where you want. And you really need to hold it to make sure it doesn't move. That'll do for about 25 Newton meters. Another check. 85. It's just under 90. So that's belt tension on the Multi-12 DVT. Learnt a couple of things. So it would appear that the top dead center horizontal you're using may impact how the position is relative to where it was when you pulled it apart. I hadn't encountered that before. This is only the second time I've done a valve clearance service. If I was doing just a belt replacement, you would just pull the belts off, put the new ones on, and you just wouldn't move anything around. But moving the crankshaft around for the valve clearance might have just been what put this off.